Welcome to the Sage Solutions Podcast, where we talk about all things personal growth, personal development, and becoming your best self. My name is David Sage, and I am a self-worth and confidence coach with Sage Coaching Solutions. Today's topic is a little bit ironic because hopefully you're going to be putting it into practice right now. It's something that sits at the very core of how we connect, how we lead, and honestly, how we navigate the sheer noise of the world that we're currently living in. Every single day, we are completely flooded with data streams, notifications, and voices. All of these things constantly demanding our immediate attention. And yet, it feels like true connection is becoming this incredibly rare commodity. We talk a lot on this show about strategies, optimization, and about building systems that work for your life. But today, I want to strip all of that back and look at the foundational human capacity that we assume we possess simply because we have the biological systems to do so. And that capacity is how we receive each other. We spend years learning how to speak, how to articulate our thoughts, how to present our ideas with maximum impact. Yet we rarely spend even a fraction of that time learning how to truly receive the words of another person. Yes, we are taught how to read, and yes, we are taught reading comprehension. However, what I'm talking about today is much more about the spoken word. Today's topic is the power of listening. But before we get into it, our goal with this podcast is to share free, helpful tools with you and anyone you know who is looking to improve their life. So take action, subscribe, and share this podcast with them. In today's conversation, we're exploring what happens when we choose to show up fully in a room, in a conversation, or in a meeting, with the explicit intention of allowing the other person to be completely heard. It's going to be a deep dive into the mechanics of human presence. And I want to look at this through a lens that combines practical reality with some fascinating neuroscience that completely changes the way we understand communication. So let's lean in. Let's slow things down just a bit and look at what is actually happening when we think we are listening. Hearing versus listening. When we look at the basic mechanics of how we interact with sound, we are looking at a system that operates on two completely different levels of human processing. Hearing is a baseline physiological default sense, a continuous and entirely automatic registration of sound waves by the tympanic membrane. Your ears are constantly open, although sometimes it feels like people are shutting them, and they're always capturing the ambient hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic on the street, the rhythm of someone speaking in the next room, and all of this happens without any conscious choice on your part. It's one of our major sources of information and an evolutionary safety mechanism designed to scan the horizon for threats. It's a biological sensory system that runs quietly in the background of your brain every second of your life. A really good portrayal of pure hearing is done in both Man of Steel, when they're showing Superman getting his super senses as a kid, and in the show Daredevil, when he gets blinded, his hearing gets incredibly powerful and his other senses get upped. Because they can both hear way more things, they get fully and wholly overwhelmed by the massive amount of stimulus and all of the different sounds. And in both of these, it's when they truly learn how to focus and listen, to tune out and selectively absorb, that they master their superior abilities. This is why listening operates as a completely distinct process. Listening is a deliberate deployment of cognitive resources, a voluntary narrowing of focus that requires actual metabolic energy. When you shift into genuine listening, your prefrontal cortex engages, filtering out the competing background noise and choosing to assign meaning to a specific stream of auditory information. Now I get it, that's a little bit of a mouthful. But this is the way that our brain and ears work. The reality of modern life is that we exist in a state of chronic sensory overload, meaning that our brains have become exceptionally good at hearing everything while listening to very little, or almost nothing. We sit across from our parents, our colleagues, or our children, and our auditory nerves are successfully transmitting the sound of their voices into our brains. We're technically hearing all of it, but our cognitive focus is fragmented across 3 different directions. One of the places where we see this show up most clearly is in the widespread habit of listening to reply. When we're listening to reply, we are tracking the speaker's words, but only until they say something that triggers a memory, a counter-argument, or an association in our minds, so that we can prepare a reply. The moment that trigger occurs, our internal focus shifts entirely away from them and what they're saying, and onto the formulation of our own next sentence. We sit there nodding our heads, maintaining what looks like eye contact, but internally we are just holding our breath, waiting for a micropause in their speech, so that we can insert our own narrative into the airspace. When this happens, the conversation becomes a pair of overlapping monologues that are loosely based on each other, rather than a shared experience. It can even turn into a competitive exercise where each person is simply waiting for their turn on stage. Shifting this dynamic requires a movement towards listening to understand. When you're listening to understand, the primary objective is to listen and absorb. It's like trying to completely map the internal landscape of the person speaking. When you listen to understand, you are tracking the words, the tone, the pauses, the underlying emotional current, and the real meaning, while holding your own thoughts in a state of temporary suspension. This level of genuine presence is an absolute rarity in modern life, a scarce resource that people are starved for in their daily interactions. Listening is a major part of mindfulness, and being present and in the moment, curious and non-judgmental, allows you to really take in and understand what other people are saying. The problem is, we live in a culture that rewards speed, sharpness, and immediate articulation, which means taking the time to simply sit with someone's words without immediately reacting is a radical act of generosity. It requires us to tolerate the discomfort of silence, to allow a thought to hang in the air for a moment before we try and shape it or redirect it towards our own agenda. When someone experiences that level of presence from you, something shifts in the room. A subtle drop in tension occurs because they realize they're no longer fighting for airtime or defending a position. They're simply being received. And that shift changes the entire quality of the relationship. And I'm not the first one to make this argument. Stephen Covey, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, literally has it as one of his highly effective habits. Habit number 5 is seek first to understand, then be understood. A large portion of the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, boils down to different versions of the advice, listen and care about people. Just to give a couple examples. Become genuinely interested in other people. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Talk in terms of other people's interests. Make the other person feel important with sincerity. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking. Try to honestly see things from the other person's point of view. Listening skills are an absolute staple of social intelligence. But let's dig a little deeper into how this all works. When you're truly listening to understand and being present and in the moment, it makes a major difference. The impact of this level of attention is not just a psychological concept or a nice piece of relationship advice, because it's deeply rooted in our neurobiology. To understand why being heard matters so profoundly, we need to look into human nature. There's some incredible data from the field of social neuroscience. In 2014, a fascinating study was conducted by a researcher named Hiroaki Kawamichi using functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, to look at the exact neural mechanisms of communication. The researchers designed an experiment to observe what happens in the human brain when an individual perceives that they are being actively listened to by another person. The brain imaging data demonstrated that perceiving active listening activates a specific region of the brain known as the ventral striatum. Now, that might just sound like a bunch of scientific jargon. And to some degree it is. But this discovery is massive because the ventral striatum is a core component of the brain's reward system, the exact same neural pathway that lights up when we receive primary rewards like food, money, or social validation. That's right, being listened to activates the same part of the brain that a delicious steak or winning money does. The study essentially proved that being heard is processed by the human brain as an intrinsic social reward. It feels good on a biological level, operating as a profound signal of safety, acceptance, and inclusion within the social group. When you give someone your full, undivided attention, you are literally activating their reward circuitry, providing them with a biological experience of value that calms their nervous system. This specific neurological response acts as an immediate catalyst for the construction of trust between two people. When the ventral striatum is activated through the perception of being heard, it facilitates a process known as emotional reappraisal. This means that when a person is speaking about a stressful event, a frustration, or a complex problem, the presence of an active listener allows them to reevaluate and process their own emotional state in real time. They can look at their own thoughts more clearly, lowering their physiological stress levels, dropping their cortisol, and moving out of a defensive posture because the brain recognizes that it's in a safe, non-threatening environment. This is why talking to a friend or loved one has such a therapeutic effect. This neural alignment creates a bridge where true empathy becomes possible, allowing two brains to synchronize. When empathy is happening, the actual activity of the brains sync up in a way that makes collaboration and mutual understanding feel natural. You are no longer two separate entities operating in isolation, because you have co-created a shared mental space where information can flow without the distortion of fear or ego. Getting an understanding of this neuroscience paints a picture that changes the stakes of our daily conversations, showing us that listening is a powerful form of relational intervention, not just a thing we do. Listening can physically alter the emotional state of the person standing right in front of us. But if listening is so powerful, why don't we all do it? Why has this become such a rare skill? Well, just because we know the value of deep listening does not automatically make it easy to execute it. This is primarily because we have to contend with a massive set of cognitive barriers that operate within our own minds. The first and perhaps most stubborn behavior is the deeply ingrained evolutionary reflex to solve problems, the immediate urge to fix. And this urge tends to be even stronger in men. This fix-it instinct stems from an ancient survival mechanism where ambiguity or distress in the environment required immediate, decisive action to ensure safety. When someone approaches us with a dilemma, a complaint, or a story of a difficult day, our brain immediately shifts into a diagnostic mode, sorting through the data to find a solution, a patch, or a piece of advice that will resolve the situation. We want to be helpful. We want to provide value. But this rapid leap into problem solving completely derails the listening process because it forces us out of the experience of the person we're trying to listen to and into our own analytical, critical thinking machinery. We stop tracking their emotional reality and start building a checklist of action items, missing the deeper context of what they are actually trying to communicate. And at the same time, we are constantly managing our own complex internal monologue that runs parallel to the speaker's words, a secondary train of thought that is continuously evaluating, comparing, and often judging their story to our own past experiences. As they describe a challenge with a project or a disagreement with a friend, our mind is busy flashing images of our own past projects, our own argument history, and our own personal triumphs. This creates a dense cognitive filter through which all incoming information must pass. We end up performing a type of cognitive filtering, unconsciously selecting only the data points from their speech that validate our existing worldview, our personal biases, and our current emotional needs. We discard the nuances that contradict our assumptions, bending their narrative until it fits neatly into our pre-existing mental models. But these habits are not a sign of a defective mind, because they're just evolutionary defaults designed to save energy and keep us alive by processing information as efficiently as possible through familiar pathways. Moving past these defaults requires a conscious and deliberate unlearning of these protective and efficient habits. It's when we recognize that efficiency is often the exact thing that destroys our capacity for deeper connection that we can start to make a change. It demands that we cultivate an awareness of our own mental chatter, noticing the exact moment our mind starts to drift into solution mode or judgment mode, and gently but firmly bringing our focus back to the raw, unfiltered data of the person speaking. Overcoming these evolutionary defaults requires more than just good intentions, because it demands a highly practical strategy composed of daily mental exercises that we can use in our real-world interactions. The first tool is the practice of tactical silence. This is the commitment to leaving a deliberate, conscious space of 2 or 3 full seconds after a person finishes speaking before you initiate any form of verbal response. I like to call this the power of the pause. In our fast-paced conversational culture, we are terrified of dead air. Silence can be excruciating, so we rush in to fill every gap immediately, which often gets in the way of the speaker's processing and interrupts their thinking. When you apply tactical silence, you create a psychological safety buffer, and very often, during that second or third second of stillness, the other person will access a deeper layer of thought, revealing the actual root issue that they were holding back or trying to come up with. They realize that you're not rushing them, which gives them permission to explore their own thoughts more thoroughly. The second tool is using open-ended questions. These questions act as a doorway that invites people to expand on their thoughts instead of wrapping them up quickly. When you ask questions that begin with what or how, it encourages the person you're listening to explore their own thoughts and experiences. While questions that demand a simple yes or no, or questions that start with why, tend to make people think very black and white, or put them on defensive footing, or force them into intellectual justification. Now remember, what I'm saying is in general. You can still ask yes or no questions or why questions, but think about the function of them. In general, you want to be using an ideology that is open, welcoming, curious, non-judgmental, present, and inviting them to elaborate and expand on their thoughts. But not all of the tools that help you become a better listener are verbal or even internal. Your body language, facial expression, tone, and eye contact all communicate whether you are giving people your undivided attention. Another tool that we can use is called nonverbal mirroring. This is a subtle, natural alignment of your physical posture, eye contact, and facial expressions with the emotional tone of the speaker. Humans naturally do this using mirror neurons. And when you're in a really good conversation with someone, you tend to do this naturally, but you don't always do it. And if you want to up the ante, you can consciously make that shift. I want to be clear though, this is not a mechanical, artificial copying of gestures and doing literally everything they do, but a subtle and genuine physical alignment where your body signals to their nervous system that you are aligned and engaged, providing a steady, grounded presence that anchors the conversation. And then finally, we have the art of emotional paraphrasing, which is the practice of reflecting back the core meaning and highlights of what the person has just shared, matching their feeling and tone, stating the essence of their experience in your own words. You might say something like, "It sounded like you felt completely unsupported in that meeting," or "It seems like that situation created a massive amount of uncertainty for you." When you do this, you need to maintain a clean line of observation without over-identification, meaning that you reflect their emotion back to them clearly, without absorbing their emotional baggage into your own psyche. This allows you to avoid the trap of drowning in the river with them. It's using intellectual empathy and understanding their feelings without getting too dredged in affective empathy, also generally known as feeling their feelings. This clearly communicates that you are listening and absorbing and understanding what they were saying. You're acting as a clear mirror, helping them see their own thoughts and feelings with even greater clarity, which is a powerful form of mental exercise for you that also builds relational trust and creates clarity for both parties involved. When it comes down to it, the best thing that you can do is actually just care. Try your best to direct your focus. Find the other person interesting. Care about them genuinely and listen to what they have to say. They're another person. They matter. And when you make them feel like they matter, it can make all the difference. And also, you're not going to be perfect. You're going to miss things. You're going to get distracted. At first glance, it can seem like asking someone to repeat something is signaling that you're a bad listener. But as long as you're not doing it too often, it actually shows that you cared enough to ask them to go back. You genuinely wanted to hear and understand what they said. This is actually a positive when it comes to listening. When we start to consistently integrate this mindset, these strategies and tools into our daily lives, we will experience a transformation that fundamentally alters the entire dynamic of our relationships, our leadership, and our self-awareness, moving from a passive consumer of sound to a truly genuine listener changes the way we exist in a room, turning listening into a foundational way of being rather than just a conversational tactic. It shifts our primary orientation towards the world from one of projection, where we are constantly trying to imprint our thoughts and ego onto the environment, to one of reception, where we are capable of holding space for the full complexity of reality. I also want to get across that listening is one of the most useful skills for your own life, not just for your relationships and for other people. But when you really learn how to listen, you will learn so much more. Part of being a lifelong learner, in shades of gray, through curiosity and critical thinking, is being curious and learning by listening. And just like anything else, listening is a skill that we build like a muscle. The more that you train your listening muscle, the better you will get at retaining and listening and focusing on information that you're trying to listen to. You'll become better at listening to audiobooks, at listening to podcasts like this one, and at listening to videos and to the people in your life. Becoming a better listener creates a structural shift in how we relate to information and how we relate to other people. This brings to mind a powerful insight from the legendary psychologist Carl Rogers, who dedicated his entire life to understanding human growth and therapeutic change. I feel that he captured the essence of this practice when he wrote, "We think we listen, but very rarely do we listen with real understanding, true empathy. Yet listening, of this very special kind, is one of the most potent forces for change that I know." When you really think about that quote, you realize that listening is not a passive, submissive act at all. It's an active, potent force that drives transformation. And it also gives the person across from you the psychological breathing room required to drop their defenses, see their own blind spots, and initiate their own personal growth. As we wrap up this podcast today, I want to leave you with a direct, practical challenge for the very next conversation that you step into. I don't care whether it's a high-stakes business meeting, a casual coffee with a friend, or a dinner with your family. I want you to actively notice the exact second your internal monologue attempts to hijack your attention, to consciously observe that powerful rising impulse to fix the problem or offer your own brilliant advice, and make the deliberate choice to execute a pivot, to bring your focus back to the present and listen to the person that's speaking. And you might not catch it right away, and that's okay. It's actually a big part of mindfulness, is giving yourself compassion for not being present. But when you catch yourself not listening, bring yourself back to the present moment. Maybe ask them to repeat something that they said, and keep using that muscle to genuinely listen. When that impulse to interrupt or fix rises up within you, choose instead to activate that other person's reward system. Yes, the person sitting across from you, by offering them nothing less than your pure, unadulterated presence. Watch how their shoulders drop. Notice how the tone of their voice changes when they realize that they don't have to fight for your attention and that they have the real chance to feel understood. And not only that, pay attention to how much more you actually absorb and learn when you stop trying to control the narrative. This work of building deep presence is a daily, moment-by-moment practice, and it's something we have to choose over and over again in a world that is constantly trying to pull our attention away. So go out there today and practice that tactical silence. Ask those open-ended questions and watch the quality of your relationships and learning skyrocket. And remember, you are enough, and you deserve to fill up your inner cup with happiness, true confidence, and resilience. Thank you for listening to the Sage Solutions podcast. Your time is valuable, and I'm so glad you choose to learn and grow here with me. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on more sage advice. One last thing, the legal language. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. No coaching-client relationship is formed. It is not intended as a substitute for the personalized advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional.